Mr. President, I want to join with my senior colleague from Florida in thanking the distinguished senator from Montana for withdrawing this amendment, which was ill-timed in this farm bill. Much important farm legislation and related items are in this bill, and to now inject into it the very difficult issue, as my senior colleague from Florida well described, of a very fine-tuned policy of a foreign policy issue with Cuba into this bill would be a grave mistake. I want to speak in a little broader context about the relationship between the United States and Cuba. It really is one that is rooted, and the reason why this proposed amendment would be so wrong is rooted in the steps that the Castro government took against United States economic interest in the island almost a half a century ago. All uncompensated, never accounted for, and never taken care of. It is a debt that still exists. Legitimate business interests had their property taken with them without just compensation. And that's why we are in the policy that we have today. But the question really is, how can we influence events? How can we better help the Cuban people to overthrow the shackles that have held them in prison for 47 years? The fact is, as Senator Nelson rightly pointed out, there is an awful lot happening in the island. People are increasingly saying enough is enough. It is time for change. Cambio, the Spanish word for change, in this little bracelet that people around the island are wearing increasingly, and that which so much represents the desire of the Cuban people. But the Cuban regime, true to its nature, continues to repress the people. Here is why we should not reward the Cuban government with a change in United States policy. Yesterday, Human Rights Day around the world was celebrated in Cuba by a small group of people seeking to simply, peacefully march to Gandhi Park, a park where Gandhi, that peaceful icon of the world, is represented. On their way there, government thugs beat and arrested them, took them into unmarked sedans and removed them from the area. So threatened is that government that they also arrested 70 young people a month or so ago for wearing this simple little bracelet. But that's not all. The most unheard of human rights abuse has taken place in recent days. In addition to the illegitimate detention of political prisoners in the most unspeakable conditions, is the fact that the Cuban government thugs entered a Catholic church just a few days ago and arrested 18 young people who were there exercising the very limited right that they have to at least attend church and to be there to hear a sermon and to maybe have conversation about their hopes and their dreams. The Cuban government invaded that sacred space, took the people from there, and arrested them. These are just but a few of the examples of why this government, so illegitimate, each day loses a little more of their grip upon the Cuban people. I believe that the time will come when we can trade with Cuba, when we can have open relationships, and when we can see the fruits of that relationship benefit the people of Cuba, not just the government structures with whom American farmers today are dealing with. We should not give credit to the Cuban government. We know that these cash sales are the only way that we can be sure that our people will be paid, and we should not enhance or increase the opportunity for the Cuban government, which is the only owner of anything in Cuba. No one owns any property in Cuba but the Cuban government. To trade with Cuba does not mean trading with Cuban farmers. It means trading with the Cuban government apparatus. The Cuban people only see the meager droppings from the table of the tourists that go to Cuba, with whom they're not allowed to even have a conversation. Oftentimes people say, oh, if we only open the opportunity for people to freely travel, if we only allowed for the contact that Americans would have with ordinary Cubans, everything would change. Well, you know, there are Canadian tourists, British tourists, Spanish tourists, Italian tourists. Their impact upon the Cuban people has not changed a thing, because the tourists are prohibited from interacting with the people themselves. The people are just their servants. The people are just the people who facilitate a fun time in the sun, but they're not allowed to have any political influence upon the people of Cuba. So let me just say that I know there was a hearing this morning, and I would love to comment further on that hearing. because much was said there which I believe to be completely wrong. But I want to thank the senator from Kentucky, Senator Bunning, who in this hearing this morning spoke about his 5 months in Cuba. I saw Senator Bunning when he was in Cuba during that time. As a young boy, I had the pleasure of going to a stadium and watching him pitch, which was a thrill for me. Little did I know that I'd have the honor of serving with him in this United States Senate. And I want to just thank the senator from Kentucky for his very good words and his clear understanding of the Cuban situation as it is today. Mr. President, I thank the chair. I thank the senator from Montana for withdrawing this ill-timed and ill-advised amendment, and I yield the floor.